Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Father Thomas Looney. I'm the president of King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It's my great honor and privilege today to introduce to you Dr. Michelle Asha Cooper. Dr. Cooper serves as the Assistant Secretary for Higher Education Programs at the United States Department of Education. Throughout her 20-year career in higher education services, she has been a champion of access and success for all students in higher education, and she is an advocate for racial and economic equity. She holds a doctorate in educational policy and leadership from the University of Maryland. Dr. Cooper has served as the president of the Institute of Higher Education. She has served at the Association of American Colleges and Universities and at the Council of Independent Colleges. But for me, much more important is that she began her professional career at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She was an amazing member of our student affairs staff. She accompanied our students with amazing compassion and passion for their success. She helped King's to deepen its understanding of its mission. King's was founded in 1946 to serve the sons of coal miners. And that was part of our tradition, for our founder, Blessed Basil Moreau, spoke of education as a work of resurrection. Education was meant to be a reality that led young people to opportunities for new life. Dr. Cooper has been about that work of resurrection in education throughout her professional career. We were blessed at King's to start her off, and we will claim her as our own. She's not an alumna, but she may be an honorary doctorate recipient in the future. Please welcome Michelle Cooper.
Good morning, and thank you, Father Looney, for that introduction. Thank you, Father Dennis, for this invitation. And thank you all for allowing me to be here in person. This is amazing. This is amazing. It is fitting that this is my first professional public speaking event in this new job, but I can also say since November of 2019. And it is fitting that my first in-person event is to an audience of Catholic college leaders. After all, it was the Catholic colleges that gave me my very first job. Thank you. Thank you, Kings, for taking a chance on a young woman who had big ideas, but absolutely no work experience. Thank you. I had absolutely none. Working at King's was a great experience, and I had a chance to lead some diversity initiatives. I worked alongside folks in student affairs and in academic affairs, and I was able to start the study abroad programs, and they even put me on the strategic planning committee, which is where I got my first taste of institutional policy making. That's where my eyes were open to the world of policy. And at that time, I had absolutely no idea how that experience was going to manifest into a career, but I am very grateful that it has prepared me for this job at the U.S. Department of Education. And one of the most important takeaways that I have from those early lessons at King's College is that good policy must be informed by good practice. Good policy must be informed by good practice. And that's why you all are important. I would actually dare say essential to the policy-making process, because what you do on the ground with students makes a difference in how we should be doing our jobs. And as you all know, we're living through a very incredibly challenging time, and it has forced us all to adapt to new circumstances that have been brought on by this pandemic. And my colleagues and I at the Department of Education, we appreciate what you are doing, and we really can't say thank you enough. Like the sacrifices that you have made professionally, the hard decisions that you have had to make, it's been remarkable. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And last year I had the opportunity to do a little traveling, and I actually met with some students at Mercy College. And these students were all living in the Bronx, New York, and they had experienced the realities of the pandemic firsthand. One student, his name was Brian, he talked about how his grandmother had died from COVID-19. And a few months later, his uncle, who had been his grandmother's primary caretaker, he committed suicide due to mental health challenges that were brought on, or I should say exacerbated by the pandemic and by the grief of losing his mother. And I also met another student. Her name was Angel. And Angel talked about how she had lost her job and she had spent several months over the summer couch surfing, just looking for a decent place for her and her kids to sleep. And as I listened to the story of Brian and Angel and several others that day, it was abundantly clear to me that these students had experienced trauma, unimaginable trauma. Yet they persisted because they believed so strongly in the power of an education to transform their lives. Now, unfortunately, we have lost lots of students during this pandemic. We've lost over 700,000 students. And just to put that number into context, there are about 700,000 people living in the District of Columbia. So that's a lot of students. And we need to re-enroll them, we need to re-engage them, and we need to help to make sure that these students stay on a strong educational pathway. These students, Brian, Angel, and others like them, many who you work with each and every day, they reflect the heart and the soul of our work. So I want to just tell you a little bit about how we're trying to continue supporting them. The first thing we're focused on is recovery, helping our students and our institutions recover from this pandemic. This pandemic has changed how we approach higher education, and as you know, students are struggling. They're struggling with mental health challenges, they're struggling with food and housing insecurity, they're struggling with academic gaps and learning loss, and there's still some who are struggling with access to technology and broadband. They're struggling. Our faculty, they're struggling. Our staffs, they're struggling. And as we continue to address some of these challenges, we have to take stock of the fact that many of these problems existed before the pandemic. What the pandemic did is it caused it to affect more people, it made it worse for others, and it put a national spotlight on it. And so we need your leadership now more than ever before. Last week I read in the Wall Street Journal that over 1 million Americans have lost their lives due to COVID-19. Just imagine the hole that has left in our communities, the hole that is left in some of your students' personal lives that is left. You know, this pandemic has had a crippling effect on communities of color. It's had a crippling effect on low-income communities, as well as rural populations. In addition to the health challenges, many communities have faced financial instability and severe employment losses. Now, higher education may not be able to solve all of these problems, but it is our absolute responsibility to do what we can. And that's why President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan, which is a $40 billion investment in higher education. The American Rescue Plan is one of the largest single investments ever made into institutional and student grants in our nation's history. It more than doubles the first two COVID recovery packages, which when you combine all three, is a $76 billion investment to support institutions and students during this pandemic. Now, this money has helped many students, including Dreamers, to stay enrolled and to receive the kind of support they need to complete their credentials. Now, we have worked with many institutional leaders to ensure that you all can access these funds and that you can use them appropriately. And last month, just a few weeks ago last month, we released new guidance on how schools can use the funds to support students' basic needs like housing and food, to support textbook costs, and to eliminate institutional debt and transcript withholding. These funds can be used to do this and so much more. And over the last several months, we have heard from many of you, from also some students and even some parents who have shared how the emergency funds have helped them. For example, we heard from the president of the University of San Diego, who used the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds to help students with rent, transportation, and childcare. DePaul University in Chicago spent over $10 million to equip their classrooms with technology to allow for more remote learning opportunities. And I want to share an excerpt that we received from the president of St. Thomas Aquinas College, Kenneth Daly, who shared that St. Thomas Aquinas College has provided more financial support to our students this past year than at any time in our history. Now, I am proud of the ways that I have seen Catholic colleges have stepped up to help students during this time. And I know that there are thousands more testimonials just like this one all across your community. And I want to encourage you to share those stories with us at the department. My colleague Stephen Lamb is here with me, and I think Stephen and I can say that we would be pleased to hear from you, to know how things are working out, and we would also be pleased to support you in any way that you can. Because these emergency funds, they were created for this moment in the pandemic to help you emerge stronger. So it is important that we strive not to make things like they used to be. After all, things weren't universally great before the pandemic. For decades, we knew that there had been disparate outcomes in our educational system that showed that higher education worked for some and did not work so well for others. So emerging stronger from this pandemic means that we may need to rethink and reprioritize how we do things. Now, I want to talk about another priority that we have in the administration, and that relates to college affordability, which, as you know, is a systemic problem that has to be addressed comprehensively. For many, student loans is definitely a worthwhile investment, but the reality is that too many students and families are taking out student loans and is now leaving them worse off than if they had never gone to college in the first place. That's a problem. So the answer to college has been that, we've asked students and families to dig deeper and deeper in their pockets. Their pockets are empty, so they've taken out larger and larger loans. And many people are struggling to complete college, and when or if they fall short and don't complete college, what they leave with is debt and no degree. And even for many of those who do get to graduate, they start their careers in a financial hole, in a deficit that takes them many years to climb out of if they're lucky. So to truly fix the problem of college costs, it requires a comprehensive approach. The institutions have a responsibility. In some cases, the states have a responsibility, and so does the federal government. And for our part, we want to make sure that we're doing things like simplifying the FAFSA and making sure that there are increases to the Pell Grant program. You can clap. You can clap for that. That's a good thing. The President's budget proposal and the Build Back Better proposal would increase the maximum Pell Grant to over $7,000. And also, we're doing things to help with student loan repayment. And so far, we have forgiven almost $15 billion in student loan debt for over 670,000 borrowers. And these borrowers typically fall into three categories. They've been victimized by fraudulent colleges, they became disabled, or they were eligible for some other type of loan relief. And we're poised to help many, many more thanks to some recent changes in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. There is absolutely so much to do to tackle this issue of college affordability, and we do look forward to working with you on this particular challenge. Now, this brings me to the third thing I want to talk about, and that's college value and college outcomes. We want to see improvements in outcomes, and when I say outcomes, I do mean graduation, I do mean post-college earnings, I mean careers, I mean all of it. We want to see improvements. We want students to have access to good colleges and good jobs. And learning and working are essential outcomes that actually do go hand in hand. Earlier, I briefly mentioned the enrollment declines that we've seen at many colleges, and these patterns are most pronounced among low-income students. And that is one of the reasons that we're proposing a brand new grant program that would be dedicated to increasing retention and graduation and would provide colleges with the resources that you need to enact evidence-based practices that can improve retention and graduation rates for your students. President Biden also intends to make a substantial investment in building the research infrastructure and capacity at schools that have been historically and woefully underfunded. And this includes our historically Black colleges, includes our tribal colleges, and other minority-serving institutions, as well as Hispanic-serving institutions and those that serve low-income Asian students. The Build Back Better framework also proposes historic investments in preschool and childcare, which is to me, one of the biggest steps that we can take to give every child a fair shot at life. You know, as higher education people, we tend to focus on those investments in colleges and universities, but I really think that we need to be focused on strengthening the entire educational pipeline, starting in early childhood, moving to elementary and secondary education, because what we don't want to do is leave people behind. We're losing students along the way, and we need to make sure that we're making investments across these critical transition points. And I also want to say that as an administration, we are unapologetically committed to opportunity and to service for our nation's most vulnerable students. And to do this well, it will require that we address the underlying systemic barriers at our colleges, those policies and those practices that have been drivers of inequitable outcomes and have created a system of haves and have-nots on our college campuses, but that has ripple effects into our broader society. You know, I find it odd that oftentimes when we talk about access and outcomes, so much of the conversation immediately shifts to schools that have large endowments and the most selective admissions. And don't get me wrong, these are lovely schools, they're very lovely schools, and I think it's important for them to do even more to serve low-income students and make sure they gain access to them. And the administration wants to support these colleges. But we plan to prioritize the overwhelming majority of colleges and universities that are already opening their doors, already creating the opportunity for students who have tremendous need. We believe that access and value, not exclusivity and reputation, should be the real markers of prestige. Now, I know I know that Catholic colleges are not a monolith, that there's no one-size-fits-all among this group. But the reason I was drawn to them early in my career, outside of the fact that you gave me a job, but I've been really interested in Catholic colleges, and I continue to be drawn to them now, is because of the focus on values, service, and justice. That is a defining characteristic of Catholic colleges. So I'm going to make a request of you. We are living through some tense moments, and you already know that. Just last week, we saw some of this tension unfold on some college campuses. Last Wednesday, Bridgewater College in Southern Virginia, private institution, 2 campus officers were shot while protecting the campus community. And just the day before, on Tuesday, more than a dozen HBCUs received bomb threats, including Xavier University, a Catholic college. These bomb threats had been going on since early in 2022. We started them in January, and that has been a distraction to these campus leaders, and they have not been able to focus exclusively on the one thing that they come there to do, which is educate students. Now they got to think about all these other things. And I'm going to urge you that in this moment of national tension, that you step up and lead in the best way that you can. Catholic colleges do more than just prepare students for jobs and careers. You prepare them for a life of service. You equip them to address the big, lingering problems of our society, like hunger, poverty, and injustice. So as you continue this discussion on the future of Catholic higher education with Rev Heft, I want you to know that I think that the future really does depend on you. And I know that that is a big responsibility, but I also want you to know that you do not have to do it alone. You have partners at the Department of Education. You've got our secretary, Miguel Cardona. You've got our undersecretary, James Kowal. You've got the entirety of the post-secondary team, and you've got me. We are your partners, because I truly believe that if we are going to get where we need to go as a nation, it is going to take all of us, with our diverse talents, our diverse skills, our diverse perspectives, to really do this together and to learn from one another. So I look forward to working more closely with each and every one of you. Please do reach out to us, and thank you again for everything that you're doing for our students. Thank you.
much, Dr. Cooper. You honor us by being here today. And welcome all of you to this last session of our conference and for having the curiosity and the stamina to be here today. Because I know what really motivates all of us in higher ed, I want to tell you that you get an A. We are here, we're ending the conference with the future. And we're here with Dr. Jim Heft, who has authored 2 books with Oxford Press since he retired as the founding president of the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California. Now that he doesn't have to be an administrator, he has more time to write these brilliant books. One is Empty Churches, Non-Affiliation in America, excerpts of which you all read last fall in preparation for conversations with the local bishops. And now the future of Catholic higher education. Jim is an intellectual historian who looks at the ideas of the world and the Catholic Church and draws ties across centuries to the present day. He's also one of us. He's walked in our shoes. He was the provost at the University of Dayton. He was former chair of the board of the ACCU. And he's been a real leader in helping all of us, especially our faculty, understand the Catholic intellectual tradition. So your latest book, The Future of Catholic Higher Education, Jim, you purposefully describe the logistical difficulties that we all face in Catholic higher ed and the range of our institutions, but you tell us you want to talk about something more important. What is that?
Before I sat down and thought about this gathering, like many of you, I've done dozens of Zooms. Now I have a live audience, and I'm intimidated. If I were to say what I think is most critical, I would say it has to do with leadership. I think leadership is absolutely central. There's a strange kind of thing that happens in many universities that any faculty member that aspires to leadership, other faculty members sometimes look at them as though they've sold out to power and money. But in fact, cultivating leadership within our own institutions, spotting people who not only are talented academically, but get the mission, I think is one of the most important steps forward. Another one is hiring. That's a delicate subject. Many years ago, 1983, I approached a dean. I was chair of a department at the time. And I said, we've got to take much more seriously what it means to hire for this university. And I knew it was volatile. It remains volatile, depending on what, especially if you say, as one president of Notre Dame said several years ago, the faculty must be predominantly Catholic. Well, you know how that would go down. It would seem like hiring a lot of people who are pious but not very bright. So what we did was we set up overnight off-campus workshops with faculty, with chairs of departments that were doing searches, and at least with one dean every time. And I had faculty, lay faculty, who understood the mission, lead these discussions. After a while, the buzz got out that it was really worth doing. And I'd like to say it's continued, and we're talking 30-some years, and it has actually resulted in more and more thoughtful way of understanding the mission intellectually, holistically, and hiring in that way. I spend a chapter in my book on that because too often when you hear hiring for mission, It doesn't embrace everybody in the campus. It tends to focus on theology, philosophy, who are already overloaded in terms of carrying the mission, along with campus ministry. There's a much larger intellectual field that needs to embrace the mission. That would be my start.
So one quote I love from the book is, "At Catholic universities, presidents should make it clear that students are there to learn not only how to make a living, but also, more importantly, how to make a life worth living." Can you explain how that works in practice?
First thing is to meet excited professors who love their discipline and can present it in a way that's engaging. Professors who understand, for example, in political science, that what they teach should have an impact on how people think about the society they live in. People in business, 20% of all degrees awarded in the United States today are in schools of business. What would happen if a professor of finance, talking about different theories, Keynesian economics or so on, would always ask, what is the impact of this theory on the poor? Just pose the question and pose it frequently. Doesn't have to import all of Catholic social teaching, which is very rich, but could just raise the question. A lot of places now are establishing entrepreneurial centers. They could be for budding capitalists, or they could be for people who would like to generate wealth and raise the level of everyone's economic good. So I don't think there is a subject, to my knowledge, that could be taught without reference to this deep sense of the need to be of service to the people. So I could give a number of examples, but that's the way, through the academic core, that you begin to raise questions that make people think about life. One of the privileges I've had at USC is leading a seminar designed for students who major in the School of International Relations. I get a spectrum of students, a few that are Catholic, many that are not, many of other religions. When we go through the issue of religions and violence, which is the focus, inescapably within the first month, students are asking questions like, how can this be avoided? What could we do to make a difference? And in those instances, one of the things that I think our institutions need to focus much more on is energizing students about leadership. I have one other impression I would just like to share with you. I was in a great research project right now that we started before I left the presidency of the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies on rethinking justice. Catholic teaching, even contemporary Catholic social teaching on justice, is still rooted in the medieval period. So when you have distributive justice, it's understood that the king is going to be able to do this, so the king's got to be fair. What do you do in a pluralistic democratic society? It's very different. So we're trying to rethink and make a contribution to Catholic social thought as to rethinking the notion of justice. Well, one of the things that I think is really important is to realize that Catholic social teaching, if you read it, you know, the best kept secret, they say, and so on, you read Catholic social teaching, it's very idealistic. In fact, if you only read Catholic social teaching, you can get depressed because of the gap between what we have to manage as leaders in Catholic higher ed and this vision. So how do you close the gap? You close the gap by teaching leadership. And leadership that can deal with frustration. You administrators know all about that. Very few things of great significance can be solved in the short term. It's really the long term. And you have to stay at it and persevere at it. Many of our institutions started with a class load for every teacher, 5 courses, plus something else. Some are still struggling with 4, but remember, those that have arrived at 3 or 2 were once there too. And it's long-term leadership that makes the difference. And you create opportunity, not just for students, but for faculty. So I think the leadership issue is very, very important. And I'm not just talking about the people at the top. I'm talking about at every level and working with students as well. If students believe that they can make a difference, I mean, there's survey after survey that says the biggest fear someone has is public speaking. Have you ever tried to get a student to read at Mass? So somehow we have to help people and help our students to stand up, to address, to speak, and not be afraid.
You really challenge us in the book with the whole chapter on how we need to have a centrality of Jesus in our institutions, and then another chapter on the centrality of Mary in our institutions. How do we achieve that in universities and colleges that educate so many students of different faiths and an increasing number of students with no faith at all?
Originally, I gave a lecture at the University of Dayton. I love the University of Dayton. Called Mary and the Intellectual Life. And a rather seasoned historian, many years at the university, met me. And this was a man that educated Philip Gleason, went on to Notre Dame to be a great historian. He said to me, "Tell me, Father Heft, what does a teenage Jewish girl in the backwater of the Roman Empire know about the intellectual life?" It's a lot of encouragement, you know. So I thought I would pluck a line from Scripture, come and see. Similarly, with the talk I gave on Jesus in the university, I'm amazed at how often I can come to major academic conferences of Catholic higher ed and rarely ever hear Jesus mentioned. Ibu Patel referred to Ted Hesburgh, talking about Catholicism with a big C and a small c. We're comfortable with the small c, not with the big C. And when I say the big C, I'm not forefronting sexual morality. I'm forefronting the creed, the fundamental truths of the faith. And when we do that, we protect the small c, because it allows us to think of the radical transformation that took place with the doctrine of creation. As I like to say with the 2 stories in Genesis, they tell us 3 things. Everything that is from God. Therefore, everything is good. And finally, people screw things up. But the doctrine of creation, which is not in conservative Protestantism, it's not talked about much. It would be very rare for a Catholic university to be a Bible college. We would want to have the sciences. We'd want to look at all those things. Add to that doctrine of creation, the incarnation. That so personalizes the presence of God that it's mind-blowing. I think it was Chesterton that once remarked, if you believe the incarnation, you can believe anything. That's why it would be a terrible thing for any Catholic college or university to have only religious studies. Theology is a core because it speaks not just about a tradition, but from within a tradition. But you can complement theology with religious studies. Religious studies grew up after World War II, communist sphere. We don't want our kids to be ignorant of religion, so it was in the public schools. But in order, because of the kind of strange, severe separation of church and state in our country, they had to clip off anything that would look theological. So all I do is teach about it. I don't ask you to learn from it. So I think Jesus, I think Mary, who's the great educator, follows in the tradition of the Book of Wisdom and all the wisdom literature in the Old Testament. Take a look at it. It's really fascinating. I'm not trying to sell my book, but it is a richness that I think we overlook if we don't keep that core clear in our heads. The last thing I would say is there's a tendency in any university to be, and Pope Francis is perhaps overly sensitive to this, is abstract, conceptual, concepts, theories. What about persons? What about love? I don't think you can look at Jesus, and for that matter Mary, without coming to grips with family, with relationship, with fidelity, with commitment. These are things that if we don't communicate that to the students, I think we've really missed a boat in Catholic higher ed.
You describe beautifully in the book, and I was actually going to ask you to read it, the definition of Catholic intellectual tradition that we are so proud of but have to work harder to carry forward.
I can barely read this. You've underlined so many things in here. Let me just read a little bit here.
Proof that I read it.
And one of my preoccupations in this book is to talk about Catholicism as an intellectual tradition. If you don't do that, the risk is downloading onto campus ministry in a theology department the whole task of embodying what the mission is. So here's what I wrote. In intellectual terms, how might the Catholic tradition be described? First, as a tradition, Catholicism is best understood as an ongoing conversation, sometimes contentious, regularly multifaceted, global, and culturally immensely diverse. Tom Landy has been doing a great project on world forms of Catholicism. We think of diversity in this country, nothing like if you have a global awareness of Catholicism. It's amazing. Celebrating and searching for what is good and true and beautiful wherever and from whomever they can be found. Catholicism poses a distinctive set of questions and affirms certain truths that stress the transcendent character of the human person, created in the image and likeness of God. It's also taught by Judaism and Islam, but not about Jesus in the same way. Catholicism emphasizes the importance of community, of liturgical and sacramental practices, the types of philosophy that are open to religious questions, and theological traditions open to rational critique. Catholicism affirms the doctrine of creation, sacramental character of all physical reality. That's why the sciences are such a marvelous exploration of God's handiwork in creation, and therefore fosters a non-materialist but fully empirical approach to the natural sciences. Finally, this is a long paragraph. Finally, Catholicism has developed a sophisticated tradition of social ethics, especially valuable for professional education. One does not have to be Catholic or Christian to appreciate or contribute to the development of these traditions. At the same time, for these conversations to be carried out well, some committed Catholic intellectuals are a necessary part of such a community.
And what I love about the book is that as a good provost, he has very specific ideas of how to achieve that, of more interdisciplinarity, of looking at fundamental questions. You point out that there are two institutions that have survived globally since the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church and the university, neither of which are renowned for their embrace of change. And we get to live at the intersection of these two institutions. And you talk about the dynamic tension, which is such a diplomatic term, between the church hierarchy and our institutions, and that our ability to get along with the bishops, whom, as you point out, don't get along with each other, is you try to find the positive in that dynamic tension. You've just finished a term as a consultant to the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Catholic Education. So from your vantage point, what does the future hold for this working relationship?
Well, I defer to Dennis Holzschneider, who will continue on that. It's a 3-year term.
Don't
and
we
he
all?
will continue, and I will not. Let me just say a couple things about this. I have had the privilege of knowing a lot of bishops and knowing them well enough where they could let their hair down and talk. It's a hard job. Anybody that wants to be a bishop should think twice. Any man, pardon me, who wants to be a bishop should think twice. But, as one of them said to me recently, if I really come out strong for immigration, I get attacked by the right wing. If I affirm the abortion teaching, my social justice people start going after me. You know, and I said, well, why don't you integrate the whole thing? He says, that's nice. It's a challenge. So one of the first things I would encourage everybody to do, and I remember really respect Rev Heft, former president of Dayton for many, many years. We actually cultivated, I hate that term, it comes from development, but we cultivated a relationship with the local bishop. And we did it in a variety of ways. We would make sure that we would invite them to campus. Not for an open forum with the faculty, but some way where they could, shine. Secondly, we would keep a hotline where we could say, here's something coming up. This could be a little volatile, but I wanted you to know ahead of time so you're not caught by surprise. Third, suggest to a bishop who might be thinking of a pastoral letter about a topic of poverty that, in fact, Bishop, I have a couple faculty members here who might be able to help you draft something one way or another, assuming that you have those faculty that are rooted in Catholic social teaching. So you build the relationship. Never confront a bishop publicly unless you're willing and have the kind of cachet of Dorothy Day and are not running an institution. It's complicated. So working out that relationship, understanding the dilemma that they're in, it's like anything else, listening to them, finding that time, I think is one way to de-escalate what can be generally very, very difficult. And specifically, terrible. I've seen it, you've seen it, so make it a positive thing, but you got to take the initiative to do it, and it can really work out well.
We have these ideological divides that are splitting the country and splitting the church, and Catholic doctrine doesn't neatly fall along the divides of the country, but we have Catholics on both sides who tend to ignore that. So you point out quite accurately that universities often lean in more to the progressive parts of Catholic teaching and try to ignore the rest. What do you advise us to do better?
I think what Tania was saying, that We tend to favor the social justice issues. We don't say a whole lot about the sexual issues. That may be different on different campuses, I don't know. I do know on some of the more conservative campuses that have been founded in relatively recent years, there can be a tremendous emphasis on the issues having to do with personal morality and purity and so on. All of us have struggled with those issues, and even at an advanced age, they don't go away. But I think that one of the important things here is to embrace the prophetic character of Jesus, remind people who are on the conservative side of the aisle, all right? Remind them that Jesus was crucified because, among other things, he spoke truth to power. He spoke truth to power. I think it was Dan Berrigan who once remarked, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you better look good on wood. Now, if you're going to run an administration, and you want a long-term appointment to make a difference in your place, you might want to scale back on the prophetic dimension and allow that to be carried out by some members of the faculty in a different way. You've got to negotiate a complex set of circumstances. So in all of this, I think there are wonderfully deep roots for the radical and for the accommodating dimensions in the scriptures and in the history of the church on how to manage these things. I give you one other example. There's a huge fight at a certain period in history between the Jesuits and the Dominicans. And it was over grace and freedom. And at a certain point, the church intervened to say, basta. Shut up, enough. It doesn't always that skillfully intervene, but it did. So there are ways in which there are questions that remain open that are critically important. I just got an email this morning. What is the Catholic Church's position on the Russian Orthodox Church in relationship to Putin? What is the Catholic Church official position? The guy thinks there's an official position on everything. A lot of things are open. A lot of things take time. And the more you know history, the more you realize that. And that gives you a flexibility when you're looking at polarization. It wasn't always this way. It could change. We could be part of the cutting edge. I hope we're not part of the bleeding edge. And we work with it. But if you have a repertoire that you know this and this, you keep bringing up that breadth, the breadth of the Catholic tradition. I have found that, I give you one last example, was the challenge of raising money for research is really difficult. So I went to the University of Southern California. It's been a great home for the Institute, but I have no alums. And you think that Catholic universities would really want to give you some of their best donors to help you build this for the service of all Catholic higher ed? So you had to network and you had to build something up. And one of the things that I had to joke about is you're asking rich people, tend to be on the right side of the aisle, to give me money to support faculty who are on the left side of the aisle in order to undermine the source of their money. Now, I'm overstating it because there are some wonderful Catholic people with money who have a sense of the vision. And there are others who can be brought into it if you take the time with them. And that's how I think you actually negotiate some of these disparate elements and bring them to. That's what leadership is. It's leadership for all of us.
So I have one question more before we're going to ask for questions from the audience and a microphone that I think is in the back there. I can't help but bring us back to the logistical business challenges that we all face. You described the range of Catholic institutions that we have a few Research One who are all very conscious of not being as highly ranked as they would like. We have all the way to the smallest of schools facing the toughest of challenges. Only a few are heavily endowed. Most of our institutions are in the opportunity business. And as such, when we serve students who are first generation, who are basically turning over their life savings to get this degree, how do we answer that question of the return on investment? How do we push back on the idea of the immediacy of wanting a job and a career when we're educating those for whom that is understandably a primary concern, and teach the broader value of what we focus on?
I think there were actually two questions in what you just asked. One is, there is no system of Catholic higher education in the United States. There's no system. 90% of all the Catholic colleges and the universities in the United States are founded by religious orders. And even among religious orders, there's competition for faculty and donors and students. Religious orders, the same order, I've seen this. One of the things I wish we could temper and lessen, the balance, is that more of our institutions could figure out how to collaborate. More of our institutions that are at different levels on the food chain would feel an obligation to help others who are struggling. And it doesn't have to be with here, I mean, fat chance, I'll donate you part of our endowment. It's impossible. Most of it's restricted anyway. But what you can do is ask faculty members to go and help, to be present to those institutions, to move them along. Some of them have very sophisticated forms of student recruitment and enrollment. That could be helpful too. So I would like to see that kind of cooperation and support among institutions much better than I see now. Because we're in a very big point of transition in Catholic higher ed. And it's not just the movement of lay leadership. My own order was founded to form lay leadership. This was in 1817. So there's a certain vision here. But we're also trying to do this big transition at a period of time when there's a lot of uncertainty about lots of issues. Exacerbated somewhat by the media. Got this crisis, that controversy, so on and so forth, comes at you. But it's also a time of great opportunity. In 1930, 1940, 1950, it would have been pretty well locked in. The religious orders, we run them, we hold everything. We didn't even start doing tenure, awarding tenure. Some people say, I wish we didn't. But I defend tenure. I defend tenure for the sake of prophecy. Very, very important. But we didn't do that until 1960s. I'm talking about all the Catholic universities. Gradually, these changes came. It's going to take a longer period of time, I think, historically. But I think we have an opportunity to reconfigure things in a way that we never have before. My last point on this is a little bit divergent, but I think it's important. Synodality, synod, is such a radical invitation to rethink what it means to be a Catholic compared to what, so often, for better or for worse, it's been hierarchy down. And then we grumble. Rather than the whole church speaking, finding out how to do it, not for lobbying cases, for those, but what is the Spirit speaking to us in our hearts? What is it out of serious prayer that Jesus, his example, might mean for us as educators? Something from the bottom up, that's a real challenge, and I think that's a fascinating opportunity. And I'll better shut up because it's time.
Do we have questions from the audience? We have worn them out. Well, I wanted to read one thing that I took great consolation from, and it's a quote you found from 1500, when St. Peter Canisius was writing to Ignatius Loyola, complaining about the job of being a university president. Governing this place is bringing me a good deal of trouble and precious little so far in the way of obvious results. The rector's principal duties are to enroll new students, to force debtors to pay their bills, to listen to the complaints which citizens of the town bring against the young men, to arrest, reprimand, and jail the students who get drunk and roam around the streets at night, and finally, to preside at official festivities and at academic functions connected with the conferral of degrees. They say, and it's true, that the lawyers run the place. So,
That's a good one.
it made me feel so much better. Father Heft, his extraordinary mind and the ways he draws connections and inspires us in the work that we do. This book is such an amazing combination of the ideals and the principles, but practical ways to embody it in the institutions that we run. So I very much hope that you read it. Thank you so much for being here and for everything that you do.
Thank you.